Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's pretty clear here that if you support gerrymandering, if you support the current status quo of members of Congress drawing, state legislatures drawing congressional districts to favor one party over the other, where courts have said bad, 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 then you support this bill. If you support dark money in politics, meaning that corporations are a person, then you are against this bill. If you support shutting down polling places for the purpose of keeping people that look like me from voting, African American people from voting, then of course you are against this bill. Of course you are. You know what? It is about time that Congress support common sense, comprehensive reforms to protect voting rights and crack down on corruption. We watched foreign powers shamelessly attempt to interfere in and influence our elections. Unlike California, many states have enacted restrictive voter ID laws that target minorities and limit access to the ballot box. And in some races, Americans aren't choosing their elected officials, politicians who have rigged the system and gerrymandered their districts are choosing their voters. Imagine that. Us choosing our voters versus our voters choosing us. H.R. 1 is a commendable step to restoring America's faith in our democracy. This legislation enhances election security, increases transparency, and safeguards voting rights. And I'm proud to co-sponsor Congresswoman Spanberger's amendment that will inform Congress and state election officials of security threats before a general election. To keep our government truly representative, I also co-sponsor Congressman Dean Phillips' amendment to ensure that the Federal Election Commission's Blue Ribbon Advisory Panel consists of individuals from different political parties and diverse gender and ethnic backgrounds. So, to be clear on the issue that was being debated earlier, you have to be a willing participant for this process that is being introduced. Let me find my note here. To participate in the program, correct, Ms. Loughlin? You have to be a willing participant.
But it's voluntary.
Okay. Can you walk me through that process? If I am a candidate, I file with the FCC.
You have to,
Or FEC, Federal Elections Commission.
Federal Elections Commission, you have to raise at least $50,000 from contributions.
But I have to sign that I
Correct.
will limit myself to these
Right.
expenditures.
That's right.
And I will honestly disclose who is donating money to my campaign.
Correct. And the match goes into play when you've reached your 50,000 threshold and is limited to the amount of money actually collected in this fund that we're doing through corporate misconduct.
So if I don't want to participate in this process, and I choose not to disclose all my donors, can I do that?
Well, you still have to live within the current FEC rules, correct?
But I could have my cake and eat it too, right?
Well,
Meaning
it's
I could participate in this.
you could, or not. It's the candidate's choice. And I think, I don't want to speak, I think Mr. Sarbanes will be here if he's not here now, and this was really his vision. But I think the motivation is that if you're going to do a public financing provision, you have to have some hope that will raise enough money to actually be competitive, which was why the 6-to-1 match was included. We heard very clearly the objection from our friends on the other side of the aisle about the possibility of taxpayer money doing that, and that's why we changed that in the markup and then created this fund through an additional assessment on corporate wrongdoers.
So how does this bill, moving on to the next subject, how does this bill address partisan gerrymandering and promote election integrity?
Well, it does, it creates using the jurisdiction found in Article 1, Section 4 of our Constitution, it allows for federal redistricting, requires independent citizen commissions do the redistricting. There's a whole long section to make sure that the people who are selected are not partisans, and provides for rules that they must follow in doing the redistricting. So it's not partisan, making sure that we have elevated voting rights issues, because we want to make sure that this does not result in discriminatory districts, but also respecting, after we're assured of that on that point, that communities of interest have been respected. There is a provision that allows, if there's misconduct, for recourse to the federal courts for correction at several stages. So I think it's
So a citizens redistricting commission sort
similar
of like
to what we have in
California.
California, correct.
Okay, which was the freight the Democrats paid to the Republicans in California when we needed a vote for the budget.
That's correct.
And we had a $15 billion deficit. And unfortunately, it didn't quite work out as Republicans wanted, so then later they sued.
Well, I'll just say this, when parties have a chance, they use the redistricting process to their advantage. Both parties do it. The Democrats do it when they control the legislature. The Republicans do it when they control the legislature. Nobody's hands are completely clean on this. And I just think it's way better for the voters to choose their elected officials than the elected officials to choose the voters. I'll be honest, and this is, known, when the measure in California was on the ballot, I had qualms. I wasn't for it. I thought, why should California give up their advantage? They're a blue state, until every state does it. I'll tell you this, I was wrong, the voters were right. The thing works in an apolitical way, just the way it should. And we want to make sure that every voter in America has the equivalent right to select their own representative to Congress. That's really why the Article 1, Section 4 authority is there, for us to make sure that all Americans are treated equally in terms of redistricting, access to the ballot, opportunity to exercise the franchise as an American citizen.
How will this bill fix the problem created in North Carolina, the voter fraud issue?
Well, first off, I want to thank you for your comments on redistricting. I certainly am supportive of the provisions that are in this bill when it comes to redistricting, and I certainly would like your assistance and also Chairperson Lofgren's in convincing our colleagues from your side of the aisle, from Illinois, to maybe go along with redistricting reform. That's one that I've mentioned during the hearing, and the one hearing we had, and during the markup process. So we can work together on that in the future. How does this fix what happened in North Carolina? The bill doesn't. And that was an amendment that we offered, Ms. Torres. We offered an amendment to outlaw ballot harvesting, because we've seen where it is illegal in North Carolina, somebody took advantage of that and could possibly go to jail. That's why we introduced the amendment that was voted down on party lines. And unless it's part of a manager's amendment I haven't had a chance to go through, I'm assuming that's still the case, that ballot harvesting will still be legal nationwide when we've already seen the fraud that can be committed.
If I may, on that point, it's ironic that in North Carolina, you can't let another person who's not your immediate family take your ballot to the poll for you. Well, if you're an isolated elderly person, you may not have a family member available to do that. But that's against the law, and that's where this apparent, really serious misconduct occurred. In contrast, in California, it is perfectly legal for an isolated elderly person to give that ballot to their next-door neighbor if they want, have them take it to the poll, and yet there have been no credible allegations of misconduct relative to that. So the remedy that was proposed at committee was the one that existed in North Carolina where the fraud occurred. Obviously, that was not workable in North Carolina. It's because there was fraud. There was a crime, I believe. We'll find out, when the court proceedings continue, but it sure looks pretty serious.
How will this bill fix the problem in Georgia, disenfranchising voters, shutting down or relocating at the very last minute polling locations?
Well, it provides for requirements on where polls should be, as well as for notification, but the real answer is ample early voting and no excuse vote by mail, so that even if, a poll is inconvenient, you're going to have opportunities to vote for at least 15 days prior to the election. No excuse vote by mail, so that, a lot of people on election day, if they're working till 9 and the polls close at 8, you're not going to get there in time. But if you can have your vote by mail prior to that, you've solved the problem.
Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Mr. Wood.